Hello, and welcome to my review of the 1/100 scale DevilArts Providence Gundam. Now, this is a third-party or bootleg kit, but interestingly enough, it did come out before the official Bandai Providence kit, so the mold here is completely original. So right out of the box, we're going to get the Providence Gundam, a huge beam rifle, the arm shield component, as well as an effect part for it, 4 extra set of hands, and a lot of effect parts for the dragoon system. So in addition, you also get a spare large dragoon, a action base with a very unique base, some stickers for the action base, though I think these look pretty cheap and probably not going to use them. A very large sheet of water slide decals, 2 foil stickers for the eyes, as well as additional stickers that just outline the eye shape. So here is the Providence Gundam without any of its dragoons or the backpack system. I'm not really a big fan of the Providence design. I think for many people, me included, the Providence and the Legend are kind of just interchangeable as the big gray Gundam that shows up at the end of Seed and Seek Destiny. For the DevilArts design, they really lightened up the overall color palette. The gray is much lighter and the purple is much more distinctly purple rather than almost a dark navy blue. Whether people like the design or not is obviously up to personal taste. I don't have the Bandai Master Grade, so I can't really compare it up front. But I have to say, I'm not hating the overall color scheme in the overall designs. I'm actually really liking the neon red, as well as the red bits on the really big shoulders. So in terms of the dragoons that go on the waist, you're going to get 2 kinds. So this is the shorter version. There's nothing really special here. It's just 2 pieces of plastic slapped together and a very gaping hole to attach it onto the skirt. Nothing too special. Here is a longer version that goes onto the back. The construction is borderline identical, just 2 pieces slapped together. I'm kind of disappointed that none of the dragoons have a gray part to kind of imitate the beam cannon. So moving on to the backpack dragoons, we're going to have again 2 types. The short one here is even more simplistic than the skirt ones. It's just 1 piece. You just cut it off the runner and that's it. Now the larger dragoon is a lot more interesting. It's made of, I believe, 3 or 4 pieces all stacked together. Again, kind of disappointing there's no, very dark gray part to imitate the beam cannon, but this is definitely the most complicated dragoon on the Providence. And just to demonstrate how the attachment works, it's just 1 big gray part, and it slides in relatively easily. It's a pretty tight fit. And for the Brigade Dragoons, it's just going to be a poly cap that you slide in like so. I like how there are slots here to accommodate the small wings on the side of the big Dragoons. So here we have the Super Dragoon backpack system, probably the main selling point of the Providence Gundam, but I like to call it the pizza. It's weirdly round for a backpack. So it does this job of holding these 5 dragoons. The other side is kind of boring, but there is going to be a nice hinge here for the attachment. Should allow it for some nice dynamic angles. The boosters are surprisingly nice with a clear blue part for the thrusters, which I think is pretty unique and definitely something to help set it apart. And in terms of construction, it's pretty simple. You're going to get these 2 light gray pieces that you just slap together. There's going to be a dark gray piece on the inside that provides all of these details. And then you're going to press this blue piece onto the center for the final piece of detailing. And attaching the side skirt dragoons is just as simple. Just a gray piece locks in. It's pretty solid. You're going to have 2 short sides per side skirt and then 2 of the long dragoons on the back skirt. So here's the Providence with its backpack and dragoons attached. It bulks out considerably, mainly up top, but also a bit off to the side. These really long shoulders are suddenly a lot less noticeable. So here in the quick spin around, you'll notice that the backpack does make it back heavy, so you'll have to angle the shins and the knees to make it stand still, give it a new center of gravity. I have to say this kit is making me a bigger fan of the Providence design, though I can't say that I really like it yet. There are a few weird issues with the dragoons in that mainly, as you can see on the side skirt, because the legs are so bulky, the dragoon that is facing forward is going to be touching the actual thigh, so it's going to be sitting at an angle, whereas the one in the back won't be touching the thigh, so it will be naturally dropping due to gravity.
So starting with the head articulation, there's really nothing too special to speak about. You get a nice bit of up and down movement. The side to side is going to be blocked off by the collar, and there isn't going to be any fancy neck mechanism to further the articulation. So in terms of the torso articulation, you're going to get a pretty tiny ab crunch, a good amount of movement off side to side. And in terms of rotation, you're not going to be able to spin all the way just because the skirts get in the way, but it's pretty reasonable considering they wanted to keep things static for the very heavy backpack. So in terms of arm articulation, you're going to be able to rotate here 360 degrees, no problem. The shoulder armor here moves a little bit for you to slide it off to the side, and you're going to be able to raise it a pretty decent amount for a pretty big shoulder. In terms of the elbow bend, you're going to get a pretty solid 180 degree bend, and the wrist is something special, but it is pretty solid and very stiff. Shoulders, as mentioned before, is going to be able to lift pretty high up to accommodate the movement, but more importantly, you can also pull it out just a tiny bit for an extra bit of mobility. So normally the backpack is going to be pressed up against the Gundam, but you can wiggle it back to reveal a mechanism that allows you to give a good range of movement, mainly forward to give it that boosting motion. So moving on to the waist, the front skirts are going to lift up a pretty decent amount. The side skirts are surprisingly mobile because the entire mechanism is attached on a hinge. The back will be pretty limited by the fact that there is the big thrusters there, just kind of blocking the way. But the hips do have the mechanism where you can slide the legs up and down to better angle them. So onto the leg itself, you're going to get a few moving panels here in the lower leg where the ankle armor can slide up and slide up a bit of the shin armor. The back as well has a moving thruster, though it's pretty limited in its mobility. I have to say I really like the amount of detail just poking through the inner frame. Definitely gives it a master grade vibe, but the construction is much simpler. So in terms of an active articulation, you can kick it up, not quite for a 90 degree kick, but pretty close. The knee bend is pretty similar to a master grade. You're going to get pretty close to a 180, but not quite. In terms of off to the side, you're going to get a pretty good split. In the back, as mentioned before, is kind of limited by the dragoon, but you can just kind of wave past that and still get a pretty respectable kickback. So the feet is something I'm really going to write home about, but they do just fine. You're going to get a decent amount of mobility. The toes can point up, as well as point down for the classic seed look. But overall, I have to say that the overall ankles here do feel a bit weak, especially when posing such a top-heavy Gundam like the Providence. Here you're going to get the massive beam rifle bazooka hybrid. It's absolutely massive. You're going to hold it here, and the shoulder is going to be over here. The detail is pretty subpar in my opinion. You're going to get 2 shades of gray, the darker one and the lighter one. You're not going to get anything fancy like a clear piece for the lens or anything. That's going to be solid gray. But overall, I think it's pretty serviceable. You're going to get a bit of mobility here with the handle to better angle it like a bazooka. And you get a secondary handle here, but I'm not really sure how you're going to be using that considering this is absolutely massive. And a bit unwieldy, but I think it really fits the bulky, intimidating look of the Providence. So here you're going to get the arm shield composite system, which is basically just a giant shield that you slide into the arm of the Providence. It's going to be a bit armed. It's going to have 2 of these beam cannons, a nice clear green piece for a camera, some gray details, and a red tip that emits an absolutely massive beam saber. The weapon shouldn't be difficult. You're going to get a lot of options for the hands, and if you get the trigger finger ones, there isn't a peg or anything that plugs in, but it is a very tight grip. And for the composite shield, you're just going to slide it onto the arm, and it's going to sit on there just fine. So here he is, fully armed. As I mentioned before, I think that its massive weapons really fits the bulky nature of the Providence Gundam. Despite its good articulation, posing on the ground is pretty difficult for the Providence just because it's so back heavy, and the ankles are a bit weak, and they're not quite up to the job. But you can get a cool pose just looking down the beam bazooka. Though even this pose was quite a struggle because everything is so bulky and big, you can kind of see its head tilting at a weird angle to avoid its V-fin being snapped by the butt of the giant beam rifle. Which is probably why they give you an action base, which slides pretty snugly under the legs of the Providence. Up in the air and free from the confines of its weight issues, the Providence is going to have a much better time posing, although the clunky nature of things bumping into each other will still exist. Here he is, mimicking the box art of his more legitimate counterpart. Of course, one of the selling points of the DevilArts version over the retail Bandai version are going to be these effect parts for launching off the dragoons. The Bandai version does also include effect parts, but it's just a clear rod, whereas these give the impression of it blasting off. So you're going to get three types, one for the ones on the waist, the long ones and the short dragoons share the same effect part. For the smaller dragoons on the backpack, you're going to get a shorter blasting off part, and for the three large dragoons, you're going to get a unique effect part with two big boosting effects. It should be kind of interesting to note that they do give you an extra big dragoon effect part for your extra big dragoon. Probably not how you want it displayed, but here is the Providence with all of its dragoons deployed and trying to shoot down the Freedom. So we're going to have to zoom all the way out to get the full effect of the effect parts, and I have to say, it looks very impressive. Definitely something that will catch people's eyes when you display it on your shelf. I'd even say that this looks more impressive than the retail Bandai version, since that one only gives you clear effect parts for the backpack dragoons, while this one gives you all the effect parts for the waistskirt dragoons as well. The added weight on the backpack does make it a bit more difficult to pose on the action base, but you can still get some pretty impressive poses. Here's just a quick look at the kit after I applied all the decals, did some panel lining, and finally went through with a semi-matte coat. And a look at the back. I think that these two big dragoon decals really help make the backpack look less bland and gray. So now for some of my final thoughts, as well as pros and cons on the DevilArts Providence Gundam. I think the biggest pro is definitely its shelf presence. The whole remote weaponry is something that Gunpla has had a difficult time implementing, and I think this is definitely one of the best implementations I've seen so far. It has a very great shelf presence with the whole dragoons blasting off, plus the Gundam itself just being kind of big and bulky means that it's definitely going to be an eye-catcher on anyone's shelf. Another pro I think is the construction is pretty simple and effective. It's definitely its own take on the Providence Gundam, and the construction, while not quite as complex as a Master Grade, does have the signature Master Grade stuff like the inner frame poking through and the various amount of sliding armor pieces when you're articulating it. So it's a very nicely detailed kit, and it's definitely a looker. So now for some of the cons. I think one of the biggest cons for many people is that this isn't a very accurate design. Aside from the whole color scheme, they really took a lot of liberties when redesigning armor pieces. So if you want more anime accurate stuff, I think going for the Master Grade Providence is probably the smarter choice. Another big con is that this is a bootleg kit and it does have all the fitting issues that you'd expect. And while this is definitely one of the better bootleg kits I've built in terms of fitting issues, the sharp parts is definitely pretty dangerous, especially for the effect parts and the beam blade effect part. Mainly in that when you're playing around with the effect parts for the dragoons, they're very sharp. There's a lot of sharp edges on the little blasting effect, and when you're trying to get them on, because they don't fit perfectly, you need to apply some force, and you'll be applying your fingers straight into all the spikes, and it can dig into your finger, and it can be pretty painful. So be aware of that. Another weird con is that this, while the Gundam itself has pretty good articulation, the bulky design means that it's never really going to be able to make any super dynamic poses, just because things will always be bumping into each other. So now for my final thoughts, I'd only really recommend this kit to really big Providence fans, or for people who just really like the big display idea. It's a bit harder to find than Bandai's, but if you don't mind, buying a bootleg and you don't mind the DevilArts redesign, then I think this is a very nice alternative to Bandai's Master Grade Providence. So, thank you for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.